So, tell us about how did you first find out about Jesus?
I would have been about 7, and I was invited to Sunday school by a girlfriend whose father was the pastor. And at Sunday school, they taught me about a man called Jesus who was kind and healed the sick and looked after people and fed people. But they didn't tell me anything more about Jesus, just that he was kind. And I sort of always wanted to find him, find someone who was like Jesus, thinking that he was only a man.
What happened then?
Dad always told me that there was no God, and that when you died you just went to a hole in the ground, and it was all fairy tales, and not to listen to any Christians. But something deep in me always led me to churches and to sit under crosses in churches if ever I felt sad or lonely. And I just started a search for God. I knew there was a God, I knew there was someone, but I didn't know how to find him. So my search took me to the Aquarius Festival. I just started travelling and meeting people and listening to all their different religions. And just kept travelling and ended up in Kathmandu, where I did a Buddhist course up in a monastery, up in the hills of Kathmandu. And I was going to become a Buddhist nun because I thought this must be how you find God. But I got very disillusioned with the meditations. They were intensive visual meditations, and I was glad to leave. And as I arrived home in Australia, I ended up going to Brisbane.
And so how did you become a Christian?
I met a man, and he was an evangelist and a preacher, and he was he'd had a stroke and he couldn't drive anymore, so I offered to drive him to his preaching meetings, and I would sit through and listen to him preach. And I was pretty blown out by the things he'd say about God, and I couldn't understand how he knew God so well, because to me God was not a personal God. God was out there somewhere. So it intrigued me that this man knew God, or seemed to talk like he knew him personally. It took a while, but eventually one day, as he used to debate with me over and over again about Jesus. He used to say things like, where is Jesus' bones if all religions are the same? He'd always tell me about Jesus whenever he met me, and always debate with me about Buddhists and how Jesus is the only way. Jesus died for my sins on the cross. But it didn't register. And then one day when I was reading the Gospel of John, and I was reading about the woman at the well, and Jesus was talking to her, I had an experience with God, and all of a sudden it felt like the blinkers of my eyes were taken away, and I could see myself as a sinner, and I could never see that before. I hated that word sin, and I never believed I was a sinner, but all of a sudden I had this realisation that I was a sinner, and it just all made sense, and it was just a supernatural thing that happened, and I raced out and said to my friend, I believe now, I understand what you're saying, and I want to become a Christian. And he led me through the sinner's prayer, and not long after that I got baptised. And I just got full of God's Spirit, and I started preaching and telling everyone about Jesus, and I haven't stopped in 30 years.